and welcome to Keepin' It Comic, the only channel on YouTube that promises not to blow you up in your own island nation as long as you subscribe. You know, I've recently been watching X-Men 97, a spoiler alert, and I've been left with a lot of emotions. So after that, I asked myself the question, what would happen if mutants were to exist in today's times? Would we be seeing genocides or heightened levels of discrimination? Will the X-Men be a thing? Is there any way we can actually heal the rift between mutants and humans? I am your host, GoofyRhexxi, and let's get started. Now, when I looked at things critically, I realized that this topic is so much deeper than I could possibly imagine. I mean, I've had to reimagine the world through a new lens, and the world is a pretty big place. So I decided to narrow it down to the areas I feel would be most affected by the existence of mutants, and I settled down on three things. The first of which is history. First of all, we have to really settle on how far back mutants will have existed in this world and just what the ratio of mutants to humans would be. Our best bet will be to look at the Marvel Comics and the Marvel Universe to draw a comparison. As far as the age of mutant race goes, we have no choice but to look at the very first mutant in Marvel Comics itself. Now, many believe that Sabah was the first mutant, but that would actually be Selene Galeo. She's a 17,000-year-old mutant noted to be the first ever recorded mutant in history, meaning that mutants in this world would be at least 17,000 years old, which was around the time Neanderthals became extinct. As for the ratio, it's almost impossible to find an accurate ratio of mutants to humans in Marvel Comics because the mutant population seems to rise or fall with every new issue of the X-Men. So for the sake of this video, we're going to select arbitrarily from the House of X issue number 4, which stated that the population of mutants, as at the times before the genocide, were about 17.5 million mutants on the planet, with a comparison of 8 billion people. That would mean mutants will occupy approximately 0.22% of the world population, meaning that 1 in 500 people would be mutants. Spreading that ratio across history would technically mean that mutants are rare, extremely rare. In House of X, we find out that one of the major reasons why the mutant population was in the millions in the first place is because of the population boom. Across history, the Earth's population saw a massive increase over the last century, which means that mutant kind would have been even rarer in the early days of humanity. Forget about the hatred and bigotry. It's entirely possible that there would be entire races of humans who lived their entire lives without encountering one mutant. My guess is any mutant that were born before the population boom either got killed, enslaved, or worshipped as a god. I mean, imagine having a child that looks like Nightcrawler or Leech in Victorian England or 15th century Africa. These people were known for killing twins because they thought it was bad omen. Any funny looking mutant will probably get unalived or enslaved. Sorry, Nightcrawler. So that's for mutants with physical mutations. For the ones whose mutations are subtle and show up later in life, I'm talking about your Jean Greys and Charles Xaviers. The way they're treated will technically be dependent on their abilities and where they were born. I think the X-Men comics did a really good job with their portrayal of Apocalypse, aka Sabah. He was literally born in a land where people worship their kings as being gods in the flesh. There's no surprise that they thought he was a god since he could regrow a limb or shoot fire from his eyes. Civilizations such as the Romans, Greeks, and Persians, and even India would most likely have a mutant ruler at some point in time. After all, most Roman emperors like Nero and Caligula already viewed themselves as divine. They would also be religions founded in the name of powerful mutants because humans tend to worship anything or anyone that they perceive to be divinely gifted. We'd have mutant conquerors, mutant emperors, and mutant dictators, and I know for a fact that these rulers will not necessarily be pure of heart. In all sincerity, history suggests that ruling benevolently is a fairly recent idea, and it's not like we have perfected benevolent ruling in today's times, not to mention centuries ago. No matter how you see it, mutant abilities will be something that's revered and most likely feared. It's also likely that throughout history, mutant kind will face persecution and bigotry from regular humans, just like we saw in the witch trials of Salem. And even with the persecution of Christians, humans are generally not a fan of anything that looks different. But again, mutant ruling is not going to be as bad as you think. Dictatorships and empires, no matter how big they get, usually fall, especially if they are built on the back of one individual. Just ask Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great. So historically, with or without mutants, human history is going to be filled with bloodshed and conflict because after all, mutants are just humans with special abilities. We might also hear things like mutant apartheid, mutant civil rights movements, and maybe even mutant music and other cultural aspects aspects. But I believe that the mutant kind problem will really begin by the start of the 18th to the 19th century due to population increase, which will bring us to today's times, to the modern family and neighborhoods, which is the second thing that we want to talk about here on this list. Now, in all sincerity, having a special power child in today's family is going to be something akin to having an incredibly talented child, or dare I say, a disabled one. The way that typically goes is that the parents will either encourage their children to use their abilities to excel in life, or they'll tell their kids to hide their abilities and try to be normal. I believe that in the modern day, lots of superstitions and stereotypes will be made about mutants. Mutant kids might get bullied at school, or they might be the bullies themselves. Two mutants fighting in the streets could mean certain death and destruction. They might seriously hurt someone or themselves with their abilities. I expect that there will be judicial laws that govern how mutants will be treated in the justice system, and it might be terrible. Parents might give up their mutant kids because it's too much of a hassle, so there'll be mutant foster homes, mutant schools, mutant shelters, etc. In the end, mutants will be held to a higher standard both in the family and in their neighborhoods. And then this will lead us to the effect of mutants in society. A big part of human society is the internet. So there are probably a lot of mutant misinformation going around on the internet, and it might cause much hatred for the public. There'll be mutant activists such as Charles Xavier and Magneto, people who will die fighting for mutant rights and freedoms. There'll also be allies and enemies of mutants in these times, kind of like the way that people treat members of the LGBTQ these days. Religion will also play a key role in this. Yeah, I'm afraid some factions of the major world religions like Islam and Christianity might not see mutant abilities as divine, not unless it is expressly stated in their holy books that mutants are divine. But going by the current tenets of these religions, it's most likely that mutants and their abilities will largely be viewed as reprehensible and bad omens. Although I do think that some factions of Christianity may view these abilities as miracles, and who knows, maybe we'll have mutant pastors and priests. For example, someone like Nightcrawler. They would essentially be the new kids on the block. But I think probably the most prominent effects of mutants in this world will be the government, particularly in the military. I believe most countries will have sections in their military dedicated to mutants. There'll be mutant military operatives being used. It's a given. I guess mutant experimentation might also be a thing, and programs like the Sentinel programs will most likely be put in place because, in all sincerity, the government will want to be able to control what would be the most volatile set of people in the world. If a nation of mutants were to one day be a thing, which it most likely will, the nation of mutants will face a lot of prejudice and hatred from around the world. But I also believe that they'll have a lot of allies as well because they're potentially the most powerful nation on the planet. So in the end, it does seem like the comics and all the X-Men related media nailed it. They've managed to portray mutants in human society to an almost perfect degree, and it doesn't look too good if you ask me, because if mutants were to exist in our world, they would be hated and discriminated against. This brings us to our final point here, which then asks the question, is there a way to establish peace between mutants and humans? And yes, I figured it out. So pay attention, Charles Xavier and Magneto, this is how you do it. But before I go on, consider hitting that subscribe button here, and please leave a like on this video to help out the good old YouTube algorithm. Now, the final step here in this process is dealing with the solution. Surprisingly, there's an answer to establishing peace between mutants and humans, and it's in another comic book world where superpowered individuals are less than ideal, but still they're loved and adored. And I'm talking about the world of The Boys. Now, say what you will about the content of The Boys universe, you have to admit though that it looks so much different than the world of X-Men, yet they're very similar. Yes, in The Boys universe, the superheroes are crazy and borderline psychotic, yet superpowered individuals are mostly loved by the public. They're hailed as heroes and have tons and tons of followers and supporters. Why? Because of branding. This is actually the X-Men's biggest problem. Not Sentinels, Apocalypse, or Bolivar Trask. It's all branded. Mutants in the X-Men universe have always had a bad brand. They've always been looked at as monsters and abominations. But in the world of The Boys, we don't see that because The Boys have a good brand, at least on the surface. The media portrays them as superheroes and allies rather than monsters. I mean, yes, they're bad soups, but tons of superhero brands show that soups aren't all that bad. Starlight is very active on social media and has millions of fans. So does Homelander and every hero in the Seven. There are companies dedicated to making sure that the superheroes are painted in a good light, not just for monetary gain, but also for reducing discrimination against superpowered individuals. So if a mutant race were to exist in our world and they wanted to reduce the hate, they have to work on their brand. It's not just about saving people anymore, it's also about making sure mutants are seen in good light even if mutants are going crazy. People like Magneto, Charles Xavier, Cyclops, and all the other X-Men should be active on social media. They need to show that mutants are basically humans too, that they live, they hurt, they love, they cry, they party just like everyone else. They should partner with companies that would help them improve the reputation of mutants. Instead of mutants working hard to be an X-Men, mutants should be in movies, games, TV shows. They should be mutant superstars. I mean, these are people who are extremely gifted with pretty amazing powers. Given the right brand, there's no way that they're going to be hated by everyone. It seems trivial, but just by changing up the brand, the mutant race will actually be mostly accepted in society. So what do you think about this theory? Do you agree with my assessment of how a mutant race will fare in the modern society? And also, what do you think about my solution? Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to check out our other videos here, like this one where I talk about how the X-Men are going to come into the MCU, and other videos focused on the X-Men as well. I am your host, GoofyRhexxi, and as always, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin' It Comic.